Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to have two Poison Pen Press authors with whom I worked for years joining us to talk about their new books. I'm going to do this alphabetically, guys. So this is Warren's book, No Witness. Warren is an Oregon author, and his lead character is an attorney called Cal Claxton, who moved north to the Portland area after his professional and personal life fell apart in California. And it's been fascinating to track along the way it's rebooted. This is, I believe, the 8th book in the series,
Yes.
Warren, is that right?
Number 8.
Fabulous. And Tom, who has drawn upon his journalism career to write the wonderful Geneva Chase series. His new book is called Shadow Hill. I'm trying to think, is this the 4th or the 5th, Tom?
4th.
It is the 4th. Okay. So we've made this journey together, the two authors and me, and it's so wonderful to see the track of their writing career and their writing skills. They keep getting better. Well, not that they were ever bad. Sounds pejorative, doesn't it, guys? Sorry about that. But really, it's just a pleasure. I thought when I was a baby editor, like 800 books ago, that I only had to work with an author once, and then the author, would pick up everything that the author needed to know, and then it would just be a matter of glancing through their work, and it would be fabulous and all. And I discovered that every book has its own set of challenges, and you're basically at ground zero every single time, even if the author's prose style and construction of the books and all has picked up speed. It's not any fun to be an author if you don't give yourself a challenge. Would that be a fair statement, Tom?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Shadow Hill was kind of a challenge, and Barbara, you were a huge help on that. As a matter of fact, after you'd finished reading it, you'd had some suggestions, but you also said that the ending was a little too easy to figure out. So I went back and rewrote some parts of it, and it made it a much stronger book. And we've gotten some great reviews so far.
I'm so glad to hear that. I remember early on, because you're choosing to write about a woman, that we had a somewhat brisk discussion about whether you had kind of gone overboard in some of it. And I did think, it was a really helpful discussion for both of us. But I did think that it improved Geneva's character, because you've had her in some really difficult ethical situations from the very beginning. I mean, she's an alcoholic who's, trying to stay sober. She's had an affair with a married man she's been trying to get out of. Her newspaper career is always at risk because the newspapers are at risk. And then she keeps wandering into really terrible crime scenes. So we'll come back to all that. Warren, poor old Cal, I mean, since his wife committed suicide, that's not a spoiler because it happens before the series ever starts, he's never really gotten over it. And, you've been somewhat cruel to him in his personal life as we've gone along. I'd like to think that No Witness, maybe you have finally found a woman in this book.
Yeah.
This is not part of the plot. Well, it's sort of part of the plot, so not a huge spoiler. Maybe you found somebody that can stick with him for a while. Do you think that you're going to be kind to him and let that happen?
Yeah, I am. I actually, let's be honest, Barbara, you gave me that advice. She said, Cal's got to eventually make his mind up. He's been unlucky in romance. And Zoe comes along in this book, and they don't hit it off all that well at the beginning, but you can tell there's a thread of something there that keeps them together. And as a matter of fact, I'm writing about her now in book 9. So yeah, I think maybe I've finally settled that issue.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I know there's a lot of thought about whether, it kills off an element of suspense and other stuff in a book. But on the other hand, if women can be sluts in books, I think guys can be sluts too. And, and Cal is actually—
Cal a slut?
Wasn't referring to you personally, dear. But I think Cal's a guy, if you really think about it, Warren, Cal is a guy who wants to be married. He's really not a philanderer or, that's a polite term for what we could call him. He's truly not.
Yeah.
He just hasn't run into anybody so far that's a very good fit for him, because the women have had other ambitions, other tracks in their lives, other places to be.
Yeah. Yeah, they tend to, it's usually their choice to go off at the end of the book. And Cal is basically shattered by the suicide of his wife, and he feels a lot of guilt around that. She was depressed, and he didn't really, see the signals, and was so caught up in his career. And so, he's carrying around this guilt, and maybe he's looking for other romances, but on the other hand, his wife is up there on his pedestal. And I think the women kind of sense that he has relationships with, and they decide, maybe not with this guy. So, but we'll see
grieving's a
with
long
Zoe.
process, Warren,
Yeah.
and maybe 9 books in, he's grieved long enough. You can do something with it. So Tom, Geneva, I mean, her love life is tumultuous at best. Her best relationship so far has really been with I can't even call her a stepdaughter because they didn't quite get married, the deceased father. But what do we call her? A ward?
Yeah, a ward. She actually was the daughter of Geneva's fiance in the first book. And but you're right, as far as relationships go, Geneva is really just a big hot mess.
She truly is. It reminds me of a very good British TV serial crime show called Scott and Bailey. And I have to say that one of the women in that reminds me dramatically of Geneva, even though she's a cop, not a journalist. But I mean, she likes to hook up, or as the British say, shag, which translates to hook up. She has a drinking problem. She can be belligerent, but like Geneva, she's just a terrier. I mean, when she gets her teeth into a case, she can't let it go. And that's a characteristic of a great reporter, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I've known some wonderful reporters in my life. I would like to think that maybe I was amongst them, but they are truly some of the nicest, hardworking people I've ever met. And I loved working around them and with them.
But they don't let go of a story once they've got an idea. And,
No,
and
I've known reporters that have actually dressed like doctors to go into a hospital to get an interview.
Yeah. Well, Michael Connolly and I have talked about reporters for, 31 years, 30 years together. And so we know quite a lot about them. But Warren, sorry, I've got a message from Tom. Do either of you know somebody named Tom Vandell?
I do, yes. Yeah, he's a local writer.
Okay, we don't normally let anybody into the Zoom event, Warren. He needs to go to Facebook. So Tom, I don't know if you could message him or something, but we're not going to admit him.
Yeah, that's fine. He won't get his feelings hurt.
Okay, great. Distracting me from my point about lawyers can be the same way. And Cal certainly has the same bulldog attitude towards a case that Geneva has. And you guys really have a lot in common, I think, in your books. They might look different on the surface, but they're surprisingly similar. In the kinds
I'm reading Shadow Hill right now, and I have to agree. Cal is always reluctant to get involved. First of all, he's a lawyer, and lawyers don't do investigations, normally. And so, there's always that issue I have to play with. Well, how is he going to do this? He has a private eye that works for him, and that works sometimes, but there's usually some kind of issue that he has to kind of overcome before he'll get involved. But once he's there, he's a terrier too. He's the kind of guy, you knock him down, he just gets back up and keeps coming. And the deeper he gets into a case, the more attached he becomes to it.
Well, that's very true. I mean, in general, he has some personal, or ends up with some personal connection to the case, but that's not true of Geneva, is it? I mean, a reporter doesn't necessarily have any personal connection with the stories that they're chasing. And you really, you're such a nice, mild-mannered guy, Tom. I've spent a lot of time with you, but honest to God, you dream up some of the most brutal crimes. And I mean, your first book, Random Road, which I'm happy to see because it published some years back, has recently come to a great deal, a higher level of attention, and the one that it has deserved all along, and has been reissued by Poison Pen Press. So if you don't know Tom, you really ought to go back and start with Random Road, and then it's only 3 more books to get to Shadow. Well, this is the 4th book, so not a big deal. But I think that The Crime in Random Road is one of the most truly horrific crime scenes I've run across. It's a really Hieronymus Bosch kind of a thing, referring back to Michael. What attracts you to that?
I read horror stories when I was a child and mysteries, and I've loved movies that have a lot of action and actually have a real dark side. My wife hates those, so trying to find something we both enjoy reading or watching sometimes is a chore. And as she says, she sleeps with one eye open.
Next to you, I can see why.
Yeah.
Lord.
I hope
Well,
you
we'll
don't
come
talk
back
in your
to
sleep.
Shadow Hill. Yep. I'm sorry, Warren, what?
Oh, I said, I hope he doesn't talk in his sleep.
That's very true. So Warren, one thing I've always admired about your books is that you take on not just crimes, but social issues.
Yeah.
And certainly in No Witness, you're dealing with a very hot topic, which is we're in the wine country because Cal has moved outside of Portland, but has a sort of a country place that he loves. And he moves from his country place into the city and back in these various cases. But basically he hires a undocumented Hispanic young man who's a law student and who wants to up his game and improve his odds of being a successful attorney by clerking for or assisting in the office. Clerking sounds more elegant. But Cal, of course, never makes any money because he does all this pro bono stuff. So his accountant, who's a great character, sidelined for much of this book for reasons we probably can't go into, doesn't like him doing all this, but nonetheless, he agrees. So you have stepped into a whole big area about undocumented immigrants and work and the ICE and everything. What inspired you to do that?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that first of all, with me, it's about interest. That's where I start. What am I interested in? And with it turned out that in the Willamette Valley and in the wine country, there was a lot of ICE action going on when I was conceiving this book. And the undocumented community was terrified. People were being arrested. They were finding like somebody go by and see somebody's car on the side of the road and go back to the family and say, why is the car there? And it turns out that ICE had pulled them over and arrested the father of the family, that kind of thing. So I decided, what if Cal, what if he hired a dreamer? And this is a kid that's basically an American, has been brought over here when he was very, very young. And so, but is under the threat of deportation, of course. And but with Obama passed this executive order that allowed them at least a stay to see whether the Supreme Court could ever sort this thing out. So I was thinking, gee, that would be kind of an interesting place to start. And then it turns out, so I started writing this thing, and Timoteo, the young man, he's interested in being a lawyer. Well, my younger daughter says, hey, I went to school with a dreamer at the University of Puget Sound, and now she's in law school. And so I, with Maria, and I talked to Maria, and she really wanted to talk to me. I developed a big questionnaire, sent it to her, and then we discussed all the aspects for maybe several hours. So that kind of gave me a kickstart on the whole thing. And when I finished the manuscript, the first person I sent it to besides you, Barbara, was was Maria. And so I think I got it about right. But yeah, it was a challenge, but always fun to write about real issues.
Well, it is. And I have to say, you did a really remarkable thing in this book, which is you made the victim somebody we all wish had not been killed. She's an incredibly sympathetic character. And oftentimes a mystery can hinge on the victim. Most of the time, it's easier to make the victim someone despicable, or, you know, so you can have multiple suspects. And it isn't really about anybody mourning the victim. It's more about figuring out who had the greatest stake in wanting them out of the way. But in this book, the victim really breaks your heart. Now, Tom, you are one who actually doesn't have a lot of sympathetic victims most of the time. Your victims are people, although that wasn't entirely true, and certainly not in Random Road, but you know, you do favor bad people who get killed, and then the question is who took them out.
Well, I think most of the characters in my books have a morality problem. There's not a lot of sympathetic characters in it. I mean, Geneva is probably the most sympathetic character that I write. Everybody else, I pull from real life. They're just not likable. So be careful.
Right. Well, now her stepdaughter, I think, is an interesting character, and for a teenager, I didn't think you exaggerate, you know, the kind of problems that she would have with the father who's died tragically of disease, and Geneva, who can't be the world's easiest guardian, so to speak. But this one, I think it's almost like an Agatha Christie book in some ways. You know, you've got the oil executive, the retired Morris Cutter, and his family. And then again, like in Random Road, you have a fairly brutal murder that happens to them. So what interested you? Did you have any interest in oil per se as a social issue?
Right. Yeah. Actually, in real life, when I'm not writing, I am the president of our local chamber of commerce, but I'm also the president of something called BAPAC, the Business Alliance Protecting the Atlantic Coast. And I've been in and out of Washington a number of times lobbying, standing opposed offshore oil because it's just bad for business. I mean, if anything happens, our tourism economy here on the coast is gone. So I've actually worked in a number of organizations and been in and out of lawmakers' offices multiple times. So the politician that's in Shadow Hill is actually based upon a real politician I know.
Yeah, well, this one has, you know, a cast that is in business and politics, but in business, which I think allows you to do some things differently than in your other books. I'm trying to remember going back, didn't we have Hollywood and a theater company in one? Random Road, I don't want to go into because anything I say would be a hideous spoiler. And then in the third book, the one that has the dust cover that I truly dislike and keep hoping your publisher might actually change it, Graveyard Bay, you did something which you and I talked about, which I'm not really fond of, but worked in that book, which is you have a repeat villain. And so part of it is to clean things up. It's a very dramatic book. It probably has the most exciting ending, which we can't talk about, but you know, big chase sort of kind of thing going on there. Very action-oriented book, and Geneva has to be truly heroic, physically and mentally, to work Graveyard Bay out to bring it to a successful conclusion. So I like the way that you change up, you know, the structure of your books and the kind of stories that you write.
Thank you. I try to make each book much different than the one before it, but still have the characters that you recognize and you look forward to spending time with. And Caroline, the daughter, is actually based on my daughter. I was a single father. She was 13 when I became the single dad.
Okay, so then you are writing with real empathy for what it would be like to be that girl.
Yeah, actually, my daughter was a little less of a handful, but
I'm happy to hear that for you. But you also have to keep up with, what's going on in the world of journalism. So tell us about Geneva's career arc that we have seen through 4 books, because it's been pretty dramatic.
yeah, well, I try to follow along as closely as possible to what's really happening with local newspapers, and one by one, they're slowly dying. They're being bought out by major conglomerates. My old newspaper was bought by Hearst probably about 5 years ago, and it's just the shadow of itself. They just don't do any real investigative reporting anymore. So she's step by step, she's becoming more of a private detective.
Well, I mean, it's a natural kind of career change. If you're an investigative reporter, being a private detective is not tremendous. We didn't mention that the books are set in Connecticut. And in fact, Random Road's on the Gold Coast, but it's the Sheffield Courier was the name of the paper, which is what, rapidly going digital?
It's not only just going digital, but it's being threatened to be purchased by a conglomerate. And Geneva, she understands that these people are just, they've got ice water in their veins and they have no real community connection. They'll be reducing the page count and they'll be reducing the number of employees. So she's looking for another stream of revenue.
Our local newspaper, which used to be a really good newspaper, is owned by USA Today people. And, they still do some very good local investigative reporting. They have one reporter, Robert Anglin, who just brought a long investigation of a mafia figure who was in witness protection and used it in order to start a second criminal career successfully to a conclusion. So they haven't totally given up, but you're right, the staff cuts and all make it harder and harder. For food columnists and for not just, investigative reporting, but for some of the features that many of us read newspapers for have largely been cut away. We were annoyed the other morning because Lake Rosenwald appeared in our driveway because we've had these huge monsoons here and our driveway becomes a lake, and the paper boy fired the Wall Street Journal and the Republican all right into the water. So that was the end of it. And it's like we could read the news online, but what we couldn't read online were the comics and the bridge hand and, some of the reasons that some of us still actually read a morning newspaper. So it's really hard to see where it's going. So Warren, it's difficult to be an all-around lawyer in an age of specialization, but Cal really doesn't have a specific practice. I mean, he's not known as a tax lawyer or a real estate lawyer or whatever. He's still kind of a generalist. Yeah. Why did you decide on that? Does it give him broader scope for the kinds of investigations you want him to pursue?
Yeah, first of all, he was a prosecutor in Los Angeles, and he's hard charging. He had a big group of lawyers reporting to him, and that was his thing. And when his wife died, that's why he moves to Oregon, just to reinvent himself. And so he starts a one-man law practice in the wine country in little town of Dundee. And, what are you going to do with a one-man law practice in a small town like Dundee, Oregon? You're going to do whatever comes in the door. And that's kind of the way I looked at it. I think I have about an honorary law degree by now, figuring out every time I write these books, there are 20 really tough law issues that I have to wrestle to the ground so that I don't get all the lawyers pissed off at me. But yeah, he'll take on whatever comes in the door. I use that as often it can be a little bit on the funny side. Some of the things he gets involved with, couples fighting over a dog in a divorce case or this kind of thing. But then of course the real case comes up and he kind of has to put everything in the background. And that's what his accountant, Gertie, she pulls her hair out because that's when the revenue dries up.
Right. Well, fortunately, he seems to have a little sort of residual income. He's not
He does.
old enough
He took
for
it
Social
early
Security, but
Yeah,
Mhm.
he took an early out in LA, an early
Right.
retirement. And when he came up there and he bought this old place, 5 acres up in the wine country, kind of looking south down the gun barrel of the Willamette Valley. And so, yeah, if he's not working a case or he's not doing his lawyer thing, he's working on his old farmhouse.
Which was in danger in one of the books because it's up above a quarry and somebody
Yeah.
got the rights to go in or thought
They
they
did,
would
yes.
pursue whether they had
Yeah.
the rights or not, blasting the quarry
Yeah.
and making life miserable. But
Yeah,
so
I
that
got
was
that was an
a
that's
suspenseful part of the book.
autobiographical. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to
Oh.
say, I thought that whole contest between Cal, trying to fight this large corporation was not the main plot, but a very interesting
Yeah.
part of the plot. And
Yeah, it was autobiographical. That actually, the place that I'm sitting in here, we live on a ridge. We look down the gun barrel of the Willamette Valley, but we live a little bit north of where Cal would be. And yeah, we had a quarry start up in basically in the stealth of night, right below us. And we fought them for 10 years and finally prevailed because they had done it illegally. They were grandfathered in, but the grandfather clause had expired, but they started up anyway. So yeah, and I had a lot of fun writing that.
I
But
bet you
it's
did.
actually very, very accurately true.
Blasting is not a fun thing to live
Oh,
nearby, so would
Yeah,
not
your worst
work
nightmare.
out. Indeed. So, Tom, do you see one of the things I love about Warren's books is that he's traveled us all over Oregon, and we've gotten to look at, the wine industry. We've gotten to look at tagging in downtown Oregon. We've been over on the coast, really beautiful area. Do you think that Geneva is going to fan out a little more from Connecticut as she's less tied to the local paper?
Yeah, now that she's doing some freelance work for Lodestar Analytics, that gives her a free forum to really go any place, and that's going to be helpful for me too, because I think it'll make things more interesting than just hanging around the Gold Coast of Connecticut, which is interesting. But I think it's more interesting to be able to go to someplace like New York and Chicago and maybe the coast of North Carolina. Who knows?
Yeah,
Right.
write what you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I mean, definitely for Warren and for his readers, and certainly for me, Oregon is a main character in the books. And, I always pick up his books with delight to see what I'm going to learn about a different part of Oregon. I think, and I had taken a Columbia River cruise. And so your wonderful, I think it was the third book, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which
Not dead enough.
I absolutely love. And it involves the Columbia. And so it was fun to actually know. I'm trying to remember what's
Dead enough. Yeah.
Not Dead Enough. Thank you.
Yeah.
Blood for Wine. The fifth one is the wine country one, right?
Right.
Yeah. But I haven't, I like the Gold Coast of Connecticut, but you've been more restricted geographically, Tom. So I do think that for Geneva, it might be a good idea to move her around some, if not. Archer Mayer is an author that I love, whose all of his books are set in Vermont. And he's up to number 32. I think it's 32, might even be 33 with his lead character. But he has been able, even though he's a Vermont cop, so he doesn't have jurisdiction much outside of Vermont, he's been able to travel him down to DC and New York and a few places. And I think it makes Joe Gunther a little more interesting, even if you can't get him fully away from his roots. So it'll be fun for you.
Yeah, in Shadow Hill, actually, Geneva spends a fair amount of time in Manhattan, which is really one of my favorite places of all time. So she may be spending some more time in New York. And of course, if things don't go completely south, I may have to go up there and just do some more research.
Yes, research.
Oh,
of course,
baby.
and one of the things, last time Warren and I had dinner together back a couple of years ago, and Warren had invited me out to Oregon to do some fly fishing. So that might be something Geneva takes up.
Yeah, we did that trip, by the way, in June.
So I have a book to recommend to the two of you. I'm in the middle of it, and I am totally blown away from it. Peter Heller has written a new book called The Guide, And some wisecracker in PW Publishers Weekly called it Fisherman Noir, which I think it's really unfair. I thought it was going to be from the noir part a different book than it turned out to be. It's one of those books where you have absolutely no idea where it's going, but he writes so poetically about this beautiful river and lodge in Colorado and fishing and landing this gorgeous golden big trout. And of course, he's a catch and release. Well, of course, he's a catch and release guy most of the time. So
bless his heart.
You have this epic battle, and then he cradles the trout to let it kind of recover, from the enormous energy and thrashing. And then another person has a female trout that's full of roe, and she just won't give up the fight because she's trying to protect, her eggs. And eventually they scoop her up and put her back and all. But I mean, I never really, to be honest, cared all that much about fishing, but now I read this book, I'm like, wow, I can really understand why people are so attracted to it, how mesmeric it is, how, people would go to enormous trouble. I mean, my friend CJ Box is like, forever. That's what he loves to do. And T. Jefferson Parker is another. There's several authors that are really avid fishermen, but I want to recommend the guide to
Me
you.
too.
Well, I'm really serious. I just am totally blown away. I'm going to see if Peter will autograph a bunch of books for us because I'm a big fan of his writing. But this one kind of snuck up on me, as many things seem to be doing in COVID, because I just can't stay far enough ahead. But that's the way it goes. So guys, tell us what it was like to write a book during COVID. Was it a difficult experience for you, Warren?
Yes. Yeah, it's so bizarre because you think you have all the time in the world, right? I mean, but I found it, I was so distracted. I really had to force myself to sit down and write. Once I got going, it was okay, but I'd find myself stealing up to turn on and see what's going on, what the latest numbers are. And it seemed to affect the creative process. It just didn't feel, there was too much else going on in my head. So I had to really focus on, calming myself down and sit down. Okay, now write. Once I got going, okay, but yeah, it's not easy. And I hope we don't go through this again. My worst nightmare. But the book I'm working on now, I'm writing about the pandemic. I just said, what the hell, I'm going to do it. So Cal's in the middle of this case, just as, it's in February, March of 2020. And so, yeah, it's maybe that's my way of dealing with this. Is to just take it head on.
If it's that far back, you're not having to guess where it's going by the end of the book, which is the challenge I think many authors have not wished to try to meet. If you were trying to write it about right now, we can't tell where we're going. So it'd be unnerving. What about you, Tom? How did COVID affect you?
I agree with Warren. It was just extremely distracting. And I had a hard time focusing on trying to do something with the Geneva Chase book. So I started writing the beginning of what could be a new series. And at some point, my agent called and asked how I was doing. And I told her the plot of the new book, which was called Mandatory, and based here on an island in North Carolina. And she said, no, write another Geneva Chase novel because she keeps growing. And that was kind of the kick in the ass that it took for me to actually sit down and be serious about writing book number 5. But I, just like Warren, I had a hard time concentrating on any one thing at a time.
I think we all fell victim to doom scrolling. I certainly did. A lot of my energy, I think, went to, you just couldn't believe. It wasn't just COVID, it was the political mess as well. And, you kept thinking, I'm in some dystopian novel, where I can't see the finish of it. And, you'd cycle through various newspapers or various reports. It was really distracting. And I agree with you. I hope it doesn't come up again because, I've just kind of refocused on the store, and it's hard to kind of get back in that groove and to really concentrate on reading a book, let alone writing a book. It's made me more impatient as a reader. less interested in the middle.
You're still
Which
reading
is too
10
bad
10 a
because
week?
you miss a lot. I'm sorry, Warren, what'd you say?
Oh, I just said, are you still reading 10 or 20 a week?
Yeah, I do, but I have found that I have a tendency to skip some of the middle of books if it's not really
Mhm.
grabbing me, and particularly in the whole domestic suspense genre, where the
Mhm.
whole deal is about the twist in the end, and a
Yeah.
lot of the middle doesn't really matter a lot for me. I have found
Interesting.
myself doing that. I
Yeah.
realize I may be more of a linear reader. I like investigations, the
Mhm.
kind of books you both write. I like starting
Mhm.
somewhere and progressing along and not tick-tocking around a good deal.
Mhm.
That annoys. And I also found, because I had a horrific experience the other day, that I'm getting too old to read books where everybody's living on Instagram. And,
Yeah.
I just have some trouble with lives lived entirely on the internet. And,
Mm.
books are incorporating text messages or,
Mhm.
Instagram hashtags or other stuff. And I'm sure it's just a function of my age,
Yeah.
that I'm just not that interested in it. But I realize there's a whole generation of readers coming along. They're younger than us, gentlemen, and who want different things in their books. But I find myself just not willing to spend the time to plow my way through some stuff that doesn't really interest me. It's been a hard year because so many books that were postponed from 2020 have now appeared in 2021. So I
right.
think I can't really quantify it, but my guess is there's something like 20% more books publishing this year than usual because of all of the postponements.
Oh, yeah.
And that makes it, it's richer because there are a lot of really great books, but it does make it harder to keep up and to do a good job, for every author. So we'll see. I'm regarding this whole year as an anomaly
Yeah.
and trying to think ahead to 2022 when this year is over, because we have a couple of just massive projects going on. One's a 4,000 book event that should be over, but is still going on because of various shipping delays. And the other is a 24,000 book pre-order program so far.
Wow.
And, there are only
That's a bunch of
15 of
books.
us. So
Wow.
it's pretty daunting to
Yeah.
think about how to manage that. And I don't think it will ever come again. So we're trying to treat this year as this kind of weird bubble
Interesting.
and figuring out where to go in 2022. And we're asked all the time, are we going to go back to live events? Are we going to keep Zoom events? Are we going to be a hybrid store, which we are, because we always videoed everything anyway, so it's not any different. I love the new contacts we've made. I love the authors in other countries that we've been able to talk to. Wouldn't have been feasible to bring them to the States, probably wouldn't be even in the event of live tours. I was a little late starting this because I was filling out one of those giant event grids for a major publisher that runs through next April. And, I don't know enough about many of the books that are going to be publishing next April to even make an intelligent decision about whether we should promote them. I haven't read them.
Yeah.
I mean, with an author like CJ or Ann Hillerman or somebody, I don't have to think about it because obviously we have a fan base and we're going to like their books. But, for a new author or unfamiliar author, I have no idea what to say. So I feel like there's a guessing game that has evolved increasingly during COVID and during all this extra publication pressure. So we're
I don't
just
think we
navigating
really
along.
know. Yeah. To say, I
We're
don't
all
think
of
we
us
really know what's
navigating
going to
along,
happen.
you guys and we, so we're just doing our best. Patrick, do you want to come up for, you know what? I'm sorry, stop. I didn't ask you, Tom, for a brief précis of Shadow Hill. We've talked all around it, but I was too rude to ask you to give us a little pitch.
No, you're not being rude at all. The book starts out and big time oil executive and his wife have been found shot to death, and the police have ruled it a murder-suicide. Their son, Eric, has hired Lodestar Analytics and Geneva Chase to find out who the real killer is. He's convinced that his father did not kill his mother and then turn the gun on himself. And throughout the book, you just have a huge array of suspects. You've got climate activists, you've got ex-lovers, you've got family members who have been cut off and cheated out of money. And in the background of all of this is climate change. And this pseudo-scientific report that the oil company wants to present to the Senate, Capitol Hill, which Shadow Hill, it was the oil executive's name for Capitol Hill. So once again, you've got a lot of people out there that are suspects.
You do, but you're also tracking a whole tilt in investors towards ethically and conservation responsible corporations. They're actually now having officers. They've had diversity officers in the C-suite, as they call them, in the Wall Street Journal. But now they're also talking about ethical investing and funds that are supposed to be directed in that way. So in a way, you're really tinging upon a social issue.
Yeah, it's one I take seriously. I live on an island, so sea level rise will basically put us out of our home at some point in time if I live that long. So I'm very tuned into it, and been working with oil companies over the last few years and in Washington. So this story felt pretty real to me.
I'm sure it did. Of course, unfortunately, the North Carolina barrier islands don't actually have any barriers. I mean, you're kind of like Venice, without Venice at least has the lagoon. And I think they are bringing in the technology they used in the River Thames in London to try to, a tidal barrier technology to try to help with the Aqua Alta. But, you can't really do that when you're hanging out there in the Atlantic.
As close as we can come is we're very good about keeping the dunes healthy and keeping plants on them to hold them. So when we have the really powerful storms, we have a minimal amount of flooding on our particular island. But there are some other islands, barrier islands, that don't fare quite so well. So I keep my eye open on climate change, and I keep my eye open on the hurricanes, because we face east to west. So when a hurricane comes up, we're like a speed bump for the hurricane. And, if we take a direct hit, we feel it for years, which we did do back in 2018.
Well, there's no question that climate change has accelerated hurricanes in the hurricane season. So, we've had this weird thing, Warren, I was thinking about you just now, because it's almost like Phoenix and Portland or Seattle have done this flip-flop. I mean, it was 73 here yesterday and raining so hard that we've had serious flash flooding. Right. And, Arizona in August, you would never imagine that it would be below 100 or wet.
Yeah.
And then, looking up at Seattle and Oregon, you've got fires, you've got extraordinary high temperatures, you've got drought. Doesn't it feel weird?
Yeah, it's very strange. I felt so envious when you're describing having your driveway flooded. I'd love some. We're just dying for water here. I've got on my property, I have about 30 big Doug firs. They're all over 90 feet. They're old Doug firs, and they're not happy right now. When we had that heat, the last, not the second to the last heat dome we had, it was 116 on my deck at 7 at night, 116. I mean, it's just, the Northwest can't sustain that.
No, it certainly can't. You've already had problems with the bark beetle and all the rest of it, but the temperatures are terrible. I mean, we're looking for the first time at cuts in Arizona's water allocation from the Colorado River. They're talking about next year. We've been lucky that we have not had water rationing so far here. And we have a homeowners association that insists that we have real grass in 30% of our front. And my husband and I have fought a fight for artificial grass for some time. We have it in the back. The dog loves it. but we'd like to take out the sprinklers and any grass at all. So I'll be interested to see whether all of this is going to spark some. So it's interesting that people come to a place like Phoenix and then they want to recreate it to look like Cape Cod. They want to have grass, dandelions, ragweed, whatever. They want, houses that look like Italy or a cute little, and I often wonder, why come here if you're gonna do that? Do you find, I remember Tom Hilton had, because I used to spend a lot of time there when my kids were young and I was in law in Virginia, that Hilton had this really strict building code. Even McDonald's had to conform to the very strict building code at Hilton Head. So basically everything fit the island profile and looked the same. I wonder if they've been able to keep that up.
Here, where I am in kind of the middle of the state, we're not as built up as Hilton Head or Myrtle Beach or Wilmington, although we're finding more and more people want to live here, and we're seeing a lot of development. But they're pretty strict as far as what you can build here. You can't build up, and we have so much wetlands and so much water here. We have, our county goes 100 miles east and west, and 62% of our county on the mainland is water. So there's not a lot of land to build. What land we've got has been developed, and that's really about it. So for a place to live, this is really pretty good. I like being here. You got the beaches and you got good fishing, and I head up our Chamber of Commerce and I write mysteries. There's no better gig in the world than that.
I have bad news for you. We have very strict building codes and building heights in Scottsdale, but now that we're out of land, they are inevitably rising. No city council ever seems to be able to say no to a developer. And Rob and I were,
right.
Yeah, but Rob and I were in Beverly Hills in May, and I can remember driving up Wilshire Boulevard when I was young, and it was all low and very California and the whole bit. And now it's just like Manhattan. It's just it's like a canyon of, huge high rises, one after another. And yet, Los Angeles right there in the earthquake belt, and somehow or other, everybody's pretending it's not going to happen. But when you run out of land, everything goes up. It's just, almost inevitable. What's the situation in Portland?
Well, Portland was, excuse me, was really on a roll. People were moving in at a high clip, and a lot of young creatives, a lot of creative work going on in the arts, in food. But the pandemic, and then we had the riots with that situation, which there's a contingent of anarchists, young white anarchists that live in and around Portland, that just have caused really a lot of grief. The Black Lives Matter group, they're pretty much have been responsible, doing their protests, but these anarchists have gone in and given the whole thing a bad name. And
I know, it's been sad to read.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's been distressing to read about Portland, which, appeared to be a really peaceful and progressive city and an ideal place to live for a lot of reasons. And then, who would have guessed Minneapolis? I had dinner with John Sanford in July in Santa Fe, and he said to me, Minneapolis, what happened? It just seems so weird that some cities you would never have thought would be in such turmoil certainly have become so. Reflecting population shifts, I think, quite a good deal. Gives you guys so much to write about. Evil developers, crazy anarchists. Everything is fodder to for the crime writer, right? So, Patrick, do we have any comments that you'd like to make? This is where he comes in.
There I am.
There he is.
I think you've just wowed them, because there are people watching, but no specific questions.
Okay, well then I'm going to
Mm.
end up by saying, Tom, you have indicated you're writing a 5th book. Can you tell us anything more about it, or do you want to just leave it as it is?
No, actually, this premise of this is it's called the Whisper Room. The Whisper Room is actually an app on your phone, but it's they call it a dating app. It's a company run by 2 women that the company is actually an escort service, and you can order a woman or a man, and it's got all the bells and whistles where you can have a reservation at a fancy restaurant, or you can have Broadway tickets delivered, or a Caribbean vacation. But when it comes right down to it, it's an escort service, and one of their clients gets blackmailed, and it looks as if somebody at the escort service is blackmailing them. And of course, murders ensue. There are escorts dying one at a time. So it's
Oh, well, I can't wait to read it. It sounds absolutely wonderful. I've been blown away by all the different dating apps there are. Some of them have really amazing names, I think. And I've never swiped right because I'm way too old for that. And I've been married way too long. But I've often thought it would be sort of interesting to see how that would work. Warren, tell us about the 9th book for Cal that you did tell us, but do you have a working title at all?
Well, the working title is Cui Bono, which means who benefits in Latin, but that's a working title. I don't think that will stick. Interestingly, it's a lot like Tom's in some regards. There's a suicide of a virologist, as it turns out, who's invented a very fast COVID-19 test, by the way. And this is all accurate science that I've researched. And anyway, he supposedly kills himself and it's open and shut. And the only person that doesn't believe it is his niece. And she comes to Cal, and that's kind of how it gets started. And so I challenged myself with having something that really was just like, how could you ever dispute that this wasn't a suicide, to see if I could work my way out of it. So that's the basic premise. But there are a lot of,
you
it
both
turns out
sort of
the
devised some
guy's
possible
dead.
crimes. Sorry?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Tom has particularly done that, almost impossible crimes in the sense that, it looks as though it's one thing and you have to go on through the whole book to find out if it's really that thing or if it's something else.
Yeah.
And Warren, you do that too. So I think it makes it a challenging read. And really keeps everybody's interest. So thank you guys. It's been an absolute treat to talk to you. I can't wait to read your new books. Tom, I hope that you have a good time on your live event, which you're about to go and do. Right. But at least we were able to here we have Shadow Hill and No Witness. Thanks to Zoom, we were able to get Warren here from Oregon and you here from the Barrier Island and Patrick at the Poison Pen and me home in my office. So even if we go back to live events, we might not be able to do anything quite like this. So, I think I miss the energy, but I really do love the opportunities that Zoom has provided us that we might not otherwise have been able to indulge ourselves in. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us. Thank all of you. I thank all of you who are watching us, and bye.
Take care.
Bye.